The natural world and mysticism have walked hand in hand since early stages of shamanic thought. From this relationship of human and nature, we have greatly advanced on both the fronts of science and spirituality. Our relationship with the natural world and its creatures have greatly shaped what the world is like today. This relationship is not merely material, but also spiritual. Much of the spiritual movements today, whether new or resurrected, are directly linked to nature and its reverence. The use of animals or animal spirits as guides, companions, and even deities is quite commonly found in various religious, philosophical, and occult text and practice. This article will discuss the concept of an animal familiar used in magical practice. This article will also discuss what they are and the ways in which the magical community perceives and uses them. Since many forms of spirit guides and beings exist, this article will be mostly limited to the animal familiar concept. What are familiars? Now, familiars come in various types if we look at the historical documents and generally how they are perceived today by the ever-growing magical community. They can be broken down into three primary different types. These, as defined by Raven Grimassi in The Witch's Familiar, spiritual partnerships for successful magic, as physical familiars, spiritual or astral familiars, and then finally artificial familiars. The first and most well known is the physical familiar, as is commonly seen in popular culture. They are physical creatures, usually no more different in appearance than any other animal. The second is the spirit, etheric or astral familiar. These are animal entities that exist on their own in the other realms. The third is a crafted familiar, which are those familiars that practitioners create themselves in a mental, spiritual or physical way. This is very similar in concept to tulpas, servitors and golems, where through will, imagination and trance a being is created. The various accounts of familiars reveal that they do not always appear in animal form, but can be anthropomorphic, take other shapes, or even be from the elemental and fey realms, acting as spirit guides of their own and their own nature and personalities. Old accounts from various practices also speak of some familiars as the embodiment of an entire species of animal, being either physical or spirit. In certain African witchcraft folklore, a witch has an entire clan of hyenas as servants, both protecting one another. In chaos magic, a common theme is the creation of a servitor, which is a mentally or spiritually created being that is given a specific command. Many use this idea of creating entities, borrowing from the Eastern methods of creating a tulpa. Whether these entities are physical, spiritual, or crafted, it is clear that the magic community is only advancing in their understanding and use thereof. Donald Tyson, in Familiar Spirits, a practical guide for witches and magicians, defines a familiar as any spirit that links itself to a person in an ongoing way so that the frequent communications take place between human and spirit. A relationship between familiar and human is really what defines the entity as one's familiar spirit. However these entities are defined, there is no question that many practitioners of ancient times and new encounter animal beings that seem to be much more than simply a basic animal. Now, looking at the three different types of familiars as defined by Grimassi, we first look at the physical familiar. Now, the physical familiar is a type of material being that is most commonly in the form of a typical animal. There are multiple theories and reports of their capability, attitude and purpose of these creatures. On the one hand, they are sometimes perceived as being magical incarnations of spiritual entities, and on the other, simply house pets. Even if the familiar is simply a pet, their spiritual use is still prevalent. A common theory as to why a simple house cat can be a familiar or companion is due to certain senses that they have, or which are more in tune with natural and spiritual phenomenon. In general, the animal kingdom is capable of sensing things that to us are either impossible or far too subtle to notice. Concerning the natural realm, specific animals are far more capable of sensing approaching weather, earthquakes, and other natural disasters, while on the spiritual realm, they can more easily sense the presence of a force or entity than we can. Whether the dog might be barking at a potential ghost, or your cat displaying strange behavior when a spirit entity is near, they act as useful companions, letting us know about things that we may not be aware of at that time. Many practitioners who do invocation and evocation of spiritual forces and entities often have their physical familiars close by in order to observe their behavior. The practitioner is made aware of the presence of an entity before the entity might be perceived by the practitioner themselves. Folklore and mystic texts also speak of familiar spirits that are physical, while also being of higher spirit. Either these familiars are a powerful spirit simply taking the shape of a creature, or they are creatures that contain a more powerful spirit within themselves. These beings are thus an amalgamation of physical and spiritual forces. These are reported to be very powerful magical familiars with a high state of consciousness, and very useful for any form of magical craft. Now, moving on to the second type of animal familiar, we get to the spirit, astral or etheric familiar. Now, for convenience, these familiars will simply be referred to as a spirit familiar or animal. These beings are not manifest on the physical world, and therefore have a completely different capability and function than their physical counterparts. They remain beings of their own independent nature, however do act with purpose and duty. These beings are usually of a higher consciousness, meaning that they do not simply hold the consciousness of a basic animal within them. They can be tied or bound to an individual to serve them as a guide, messenger, or to perform tasks for the practitioner. Unlike the crafted familiar, these beings were not created by the practitioner, but are instead discovered, either having them come to the practitioner, or the practitioner seeking them in some sort of ritual. As Raven Grimassi states, many modern witches tend to perceive the familiar in much the same way that American Indian traditions view animal guides or power animals. In this regard, they are messengers to and from the other world, and are gifted to one by the Great Spirit. They are also healers and powerful allies to those whom they form a relationship with. Being spiritual beings, these familiars operate and are accessed within the spirit realm. It takes fine attunement of the practitioner to realize that they are there, unless an applicable trance state is entered and the beings are directly interacted with. Those that have experience with these entities will know how accessible and useful they can be. To some, they are seen as subservient beings at the disposal of the practitioner. However, this point of view is fading in modern magic, as many are starting to see all intelligences as equals. For many nature-orientated practitioners, the view of respecting each human, creature, or spirit is at the forefront of their faith. Different beings perceive and experience things in their own right, and therefore contain their own wisdom. They must then be respected for their place in the vast universe. Because these beings exist in the spirit realm, They do not directly interact with the physical world in a physical manner. Instead, they alter the spiritual sphere, which in turn affects events on the physical plane and the human experience. Folklore and myth document many types of familiar spirit, not all of them animal in nature or design. Elemental spirits and other anthropomorphic intelligences of a lower nature are written about rather frequently. The third classification of familiar animals are the crafted or artificial familiars. Now, these entities or familiars are known by many names, such as tulpas in Eastern philosophy, golems in Judeo-mysticism, and servitors in chaos magic circles. These entities are created by the practitioner in order to fulfill a specific purpose. In essence, they are summoned from the will of the practitioner themselves. Many of these entities are not animal in design, as any form or purpose can be ascribed to them. However, they are also used to create animal creatures that serve as temporary companions, aids, or guides. These entities are temporary for the most part. However, many practitioners state that with continual magical effort, these entities may become permanent beings, with their own personalities. What exactly these entities are, and the way they function remain debated, as most magic usually is. They are argued to be mental beings, while others state that they are spirit beings or an amalgamation of the two. It is even reported that with enough effort, intent, and energy being invested over time, the crafted entity can become physical, or at least be perceived by the physical senses too, and not just by yourself but by others also. Commonly, the entity will only be perceived as a familiar if the spirit is a permanent companion and aid. Thus, many of the servitors being created for temporary means are not regarded as familiars, but instead as a manifested being with a defined and temporary purpose. Many use the methods of servitor creation to create things without particular intelligence. The crafted spirit may simply resemble an object radiating a specific aura, for example, or just a little gadget capable of doing little tasks. In this way, the artificial creation can be anything one wishes to conjure temporarily, more similar in nature to a spell than a familiar or companion. Now, the primary difference between the artificial familiar or crafted familiar and the other two familiars is that these crafted familiar are made to be temporary beings, simply serving for one particular purpose. If we use Tyson's explanation of a familiar being anything that you build a relationship with, then these familiars do not suit that description. In essence, they can be seen to be more like a spell, a temporary conjuration, than an actual companion. Now, to conclude, we can see that the familiar concept is very diverse as any magical practice is. Many explanations and classifications exist concerning animal spirit guides. However, it remains clear that these beings are revered in some way or another, and that the interest of their subject is not fading. If anything, their use and understanding is growing along with the magic-minded community. Whichever theory as to the nature of these entities is completely correct is not the primary concern and will forever remain debated in the larger community, in my opinion. Instead, any practitioner who puts in the effort to contact, interact, and learn from these entities will inevitably understand more about them. It is one's own understanding and experience that will reveal far more than any text or opinion can. These entities are intelligences of their own and must therefore be treated with respect. As with all forms of magic, the ethics of the practice remains a crucial aspect. I encourage anyone willing to learn more about familiars to have a look at the reference list below for a start, and then work from there. Just remember that your personal individualization of magical practice remains important, and that there is really nothing wrong with not following another practitioner word by word. You remain just as free as the magical force itself. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. If you liked the video, please click like and subscribe. Also check out our main webpage, spiritmonkey.me, for a lot more interesting articles and links to all the other pages. And also check out our Patreon page. If you feel like giving $1, please do. It's all appreciated. Other than that, have an awesome day. Cheers.